Yeah, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about the skills of reading and writing because so far we've been talking about listening and speaking, and actually that is one of the most important parts of learning a language is making sure that you have enough practice speaking and listening to others, right? And let's not forget about reading and writing. So, what are some of the tips that I want to share with you? I think one of the big tips that I want to share, I'll share with you number one, ways to look at what reading really means and continuing to have a very practical approach. Functionally fluent is all about, completing functions and therefore being practical. How can we have a practical approach to reading? As well as I can actually give you some tips as far as ways to make sure you're getting more reading done in your life. So I'll start out by saying that if I had been recording this even up to 5, probably 10 years ago, it might have been a challenge to get a hold of authentic materials, or we might be speaking more about how can you order books online in Spanish from real authors or whatever, right? Here's the deal. Nowadays, with social media being what it is, with the internet being what it is, with educational opportunities being what they are, we're surrounded by opportunities to read, okay? So whether it's you have somebody in your life who speaks Spanish and you're able to maybe have a conversation with them on Facebook, like a very basic conversation through Facebook Messenger or through any other kind of social media or chat room, it could be somebody that's close to you and you want to have like a half an hour conversation with them and you just say, hey, can we do 5 minutes worth of this in Spanish? Because that gives you the chance to be able to do some reading and writing, okay? And then where I want to have sort of shift our the way that we talk about reading. I feel like when we think about reading magazines, books, websites. We think about like having a thing that we sit down to intentionally read. And guess what? When we're out and about in our lives, in our neighborhoods, whether you're living abroad in a Spanish-speaking country or whether you're here in the United States, where there are a lot of Spanish signs, Spanish billboards. I mean, you can be going to the restroom and see little signs about washing your hands in Spanish as well as English. And maybe as somebody who hasn't been learning Spanish so far, you're not tuned into that. So I would say a really important part of reading is tuning your brain into what is the written Spanish that's around you in really practical day-to-day situations. And then also when you're doing your functionally fluent in between practice, go ahead and count that as, hey, I did some reading this week. I went to the park and I made it a point to read all the signage in Spanish as well as in English. That is reading, and it's actually practical reading. And then that way, those of you, because not everybody enjoys reading books and magazines, right? And yet, in 2020, in the literate world that we live in, we do need to read, even if we're not, people who consider reading to be a hobby. So I feel like in a lot of more, I guess I'm going to use the word academic environments and a lot of other learning environments that are not as focused on practicality as Functionally Fluent is focused on, there's just a lot of oh, here's your reading list, here's all the books that you need to order, here's all the texts that you need to read. And for Functionally Fluent purposes, we want you to learn how to do reading in Spanish and have it be reading that is really effective and interesting to you. So as a recap for reading, social media stuff, engaging with people in social media passively, because reading is a passive skill, reading what other people have written on their Facebook wall or whatever, right? Reading signage around you. And also there's, if we're speaking about intentional reading, here's where I want to give you a tip. There's something that's called graded readers. And graded readers, if you Google graded readers in Spanish, here's what that means. I know that in the world of teaching English as a foreign language, which I was in for a really, really, really long time, graded readers definitely are a wonderful tool. I mean, they've taken Shakespeare and they've sort of reduced it down to beginner level, intermediate level, advanced level. They've taken Agatha Christie novels and they've rewritten them at a level that's for intermediate English learners, right? So this is what the original graded readers, at least the ones that I know of, were for people who were learning English as a second language. As the Spanish as a second language sector catches up to that, I do believe that there are graded readers in Spanish. I'm not sure that they're the same quality as the English as a second language ones. I'm not sure that there's the same variety. And one thing I believe you'll have to make a distinction between what are the graded readers that are intended for children who are learning Spanish, and then what are the graded readers that are intended for adults. If you do decide to go ahead and buy like children's books that are graded readers, I mean, that's fine. I definitely want you to have the practice and the exposure. But I would give you the heads up that number one, you may find them boring. I mean, you're an adult. You may not find children's literature particularly fascinating, in which case you might read a few pages and then get bored with it, right? And we want you to actually be doing reading that's interesting to you. And number two, sometimes if the company that has put together the graded reader is just doing like fairy tales, I mean, just because something's a fairy tale doesn't mean that the language level in there is like low enough to be good for you. So yeah, but just you should know that that tool is out there, the graded readers. And yeah, let's go ahead and switch on now to the topic of writing. I won't spend too long on the topic of writing because it's really going to be the flip side of reading. What I mean by that is if I'm saying, look, for you to have more exposure to reading, a wonderful thing to do is make sure that you check out one article online per night. Or that you go to a Spanish-speaking friend's Facebook page and you read their wall that day. Like, sure, if that's the reading part of it, the writing part of it would be to interact more through social media. Functionally Fluent, the online course has a lot of writing activities in there, and they're very, very simple. I mean, it may be like at the beginner level, it's like, oh, write a paragraph about yourself, and all the way up to at our advanced level, it's like write a resume. So what you can do if you're using Functionally Fluent to learn, on your own, you can go ahead and follow the writing prompts that are in Functionally Fluent, and then just ask a friend if they wouldn't mind taking a couple minutes out of their life to go over it, right? Now, you might want to hire a tutor or a teacher to actually grade it for you, and tell you, what mistakes you made and so on and so forth. And I mean, that would be wonderful. But if you don't have a tutor or a teacher outside of the Functionally Fluent course, just know that the writing activities in Functionally Fluent are kind of bite-sized and small enough that it shouldn't feel like a huge burden if you're asking your husband, your wife who speaks Spanish, or your neighbor who speaks Spanish, hey, can I shoot you a quick email with a paragraph that I wrote about myself? Can you let me know if you understood everything in there? Are there any pointers that you have for me? And so that's how you could do some more practice with writing. A couple more things circling back to reading that I don't want to forget. A lot of magazines, I'm not sure if y'all have heard, a lot of magazines in any language are actually, magazines for adults, like People magazine, or like certain celebrity gossip magazines or whatever. Even magazines like Popular Science, they're still written at like a not very high level. So if you were to get your hands on a popular magazine that's written in Spanish, chances are that the language in there, if you're a beginner, it's going to be hard no matter what, because you're a beginner, right? That said, you might find a simply written magazine in Spanish to be easier than you would expect, and it to be a really fantastic resource for you, whether it's the online version of the magazine or you go ahead and go to the store and buy a copy. That would, I think, be super helpful for you. And on that note as well, I also would like for you guys to set your expectations properly. When you're dealing with reading that's in the Functionally Fluent books, assuming that you're learning in Functionally Fluent, the Functionally Fluent course, assuming that you're learning at the right level for you of Functionally Fluent, I've created those reading exercises to be like 80% understandable, and then there's like a 20% stretch, maybe words you don't know. So what's in Functionally Fluent, precisely because it's created for Spanish learners, it's going to be a little bit more gentle. So you should be able to understand between 60 and 80% of what's in your Functionally Fluent material. When you go to the store and buy People magazine on the shelf, or you look up, you go onto a website and you read an article in Spanish, don't have that same expectation that you're going to be able to understand 80% of it. Just don't, because you're not going to be able to understand 80% of it. If you're a beginner, you'll be lucky if you can understand 10%, and even that will be based on certain key like words that jump out at you, as well as cognates, words that are similar to English. But hey, it's a start, right? The other thing is that, and yes, so I was saying by the time you get to an advanced level, you should be able to understand at least half of what's called authentic material in Spanish. But even at the advanced level of functionally fluent, you should still expect that when you encounter authentic native materials, there's still going to be a continuing stretch for you. So go gentle with yourself. If you are a beginner and you start reading a book or a magazine in Spanish and you're frustrated, please don't let that frustration discourage you from continuing to learn Spanish. Please just understand, give yourself a pat on the back, say, yay, I understood 5% of what that magazine said, and consider that a win, and then move on. So yeah, one last tip, movies and subtitles, okay? If you have a favorite movie that you've seen a million times in English, go ahead and watch it in Spanish. Now this overlaps with listening, because movies are a really great way to listen as well. But if you actually turn the subtitles on to whatever movie you're watching, whatever, Hulu or Netflix channel you're on, whatever TV show, you've been binging on or whatever, if you can watch it in English with subtitles in Spanish. And that's already going to give you like a lot of really, really good exposure to written Spanish. You could watch it in Spanish with subtitles in English. Now there you're not practicing reading in Spanish, you're practicing listening while reading in English. Or as you start to become more and more advanced, you could put on the movie or the TV show in Spanish with the subtitles in Spanish as an additional kind of crutch that you could lean on. So just get creative with what you consider to be reading. Get creative with what you consider to be writing. Understand that it's all around you and you don't need to treat it as some big standalone thing. Go easy and gentle with yourself in the way that you approach it, and rely a lot on the functionally fluent reading and writing exercises, because there are quite a few in there. So good luck to you with the skills of reading and writing.